decide that you want to preserve your privacy and make sure all the data that goes in and out of your computer is encrypted, then check out NordVPN. My affiliate link will give you something like a 2/3 discount on some of their packages. So Tom, one of the ideas that I got from you, and I've been thinking about this and digging into this, is about climate change as European imperialism. It is the 21st century's civilizing mission. How Europe is going to save the rest of the world, save those savages from the carbon dioxide poisoning effects of using oil and coal and gas.
Right. Oh, you're right about that. Or you're right to have picked up on that, or whatever it was. I might have laid down in some random thought that I had in a previous interview or whatever. You're right. It's kind of, think of climate change at this point as kind of the new European white man's burden. You know what I mean? And I hate to be I hate to be inflammatory about it or anything, but not really. This is me after all. It's true. I mean, if you really stop to think of it, if you really look at it, or if you just I might really look at it, if you just kind of do a quick, dirty analysis, I don't know how accurate this is, and hey, everybody leave comments below that Tom's just a racist. I'm happy to entertain that thought. But the idea that they lost Christianity, they've willingly given up Christianity as an organizing principle, as a cultural organizing principle, and they've now tried to overlay climate change on top of that, and now they're going to export climate change to the rest of the world in the same way that they tried to export Christianity to the rest of the world as a cover for their cynical appropriation of resources around the world in the during the age of exploration in the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, right? So that's it's not a bad analogy. I don't know how accurate that analogy is, but it's certainly something to consider. And the way they're going about it, certainly when you listen to a guy like EU quote-unquote foreign minister Joseph Borrell call the rest of the world a jungle and the EU a garden, to send all the, speaking to all of the, incoming next generation of EU bureaucrats at the College of Europe graduating ceremonies. What he said a couple of months ago. I wrote about it in the newsletter. Right after it happened, I just thought it was ridiculous, right?
It was naked imperialism.
But he put it in those terms. It was so obvious that this is just this is just another white man's burden argument over and over and over again with these people. So, but that's the way they are. That's who they are. And they just they no matter how much they try to dress up try and dress everything up in the moral high ground, and as in they're doing this for the betterment of humanity. What the reality is that they're doing it for the betterment of themselves, and humanity gets to go along with whatever it is that they believe is the right thing for us to do next. And it's such complete and utter solipsistic nonsense. And I have zero patience for it anymore. When it really comes down to is that most of them are afraid of losing power, or worse, dying in their minds, and they have this unbelievable need to control everything, and that's that. And my anger and frustration at these people is my own issues of control, right? I don't want to watch them turn the world into, as I've said many times, Minority Report with more Germans, right? I don't want to see that. So my fear, my anxiety, my anger that comes out in every one of these media appearances and every one of my articles that I write is me desperately trying to have some agency over where I can see them going. And that's an illusion too, right? So shit, I talked with my therapist about this on Wednesday, for fuck's sake. That's where we are, right? And and even worse than that is that they've driven us all into these states of psychological duress. I mean, they're beyond anxiety pimping at this point, as my friend Dexter White likes to call it. And I always have to give him credit for that. Otherwise, I owe him $1. But I don't give him credit for it. So, because it's such a great phrase. But they're well beyond anxiety pimping, right, at this point, where they're just trying to pimp you into being maximally in a state of fight or flight so that they can then move us in whatever direction they want to move us, right? It's beyond that now. Now we're well into the argument that if you don't go along with what we want, well, your choice will be you get to have globalism or you get to have thermonuclear war. You don't have a choice. Those are your choices. Choose. You can have technocratic globalism with, the European colonial powers at the center, with the United States having to be, being the scapegoat for all of their bad policy and the enforcement arm of their bad policy, while they blame it all on the dirty Americans, because, we're just a bunch of rubes, and while they try to come out as the benighted saviors of humanity. Like that's the biggest lie of all time. And I'm just done with it. And I always have been done with it, but I get more and more done with it every day. And the worst part is that we're all the victims. Just to remind everybody that when I talk about this, and I don't blame Europeans for this. I don't blame Britons. I don't blame you, Rich, any more than Europeans should blame me as an American. Though we all bear some burden because we've allowed this shit to happen. We all got bribed in a certain way by the cheap money and the cheap cars and the this and all that stuff that went along with it. And woke up way too late for many of us to really see what was happening. And so while we bear some share of the blame, at the end of the day, we're also, we all make the best decisions that we can given our circumstances, which is sometimes it is better to go along to get along because we're just trying to keep our families alive.
Yep.
So, they always put you in these terrible situations where you have to choose between these horrible outcomes, these Hobson's choices, and then they pit us against each other while we fight it out to see which side of the choice we're going to make, and it's just ridiculous. Yeah, and we should all just opt out, honestly, at the end of the day.
Yeah, and the pitting against each other, because you've said this in other videos that you and I have done, and also with Alexander Mercurius, who wasn't able to make it. We've had scheduling issues this time around. It is coming up to Christmas and very, very busy for us all, right? Yeah. Is Europe is setting US and China and Russia against each other so it can then pick up the spoils when these titans defeat each other. So this set of gangsters setting up the other set of gangsters to go to war, and then the first set of gangsters can take over the global turf.
Sure.
But the tragedy and the irony and the folly is that apart from, I think, Norway and Britain, Europe has nothing. Norway and Britain have access to independent energy. Europe has nothing. Nothing. There's no first order income generation, which resource extraction allows you to do. And then the stuff I see coming out of Europe is how Europe is killing itself with the sanctions without any energy. How on earth are they ever going to rule ever again?
Well, I think their plan is, and it's a daft one. So, it's daft. I like to use that word since I'm talking to an Englishman.
Daft.
Daft. Sorry.
Daft. Daft.
Got to get that right. Can't use the New York version of the word. Have to use the London version of the word. Not daft. Daft. Okay, daft. Got it. All right. So it's a daft plan, but it's one nonetheless, which is. Sorry, I can't help myself. The comedy's not good, folks, but it's free. So the daft plan that it is that they really believe that if everybody gets wiped out and they're the first ones to collapse with their plan of being the first ones to rebuild, because they'll be the only ones with the plan in place and the infrastructure in place to just default on all the debts. Everybody else has to default. They force everybody else into default at the same time. And then they get to be the first ones to rebuild. That's what they're doing. And in order for that to happen, they have to destroy the middle class, the bourgeoisie, as they would put it, because they're all commies. In the rich countries in Europe, that means Italy, that means Germany, that means France. Well, France isn't rich anymore, but let's.
Well, they've got to get rid of whatever middle class is left.
Whatever middle class there is. So that includes, Sweden but Sweden, most of the Scandinavian countries have already destroyed their middle classes because I hate to break it to anybody in Scandinavia, but your upper class is the equivalent of our lower class here in the United States. In purchasing power parity numbers and everything else, the numbers are stark. So maybe you're used to living on crumbs, but it is what it is. Whether you think we should all be living on crumbs is, that's again, I think another coping mechanism, because we've all been ground down into this attitude that we shouldn't wish for anything, we shouldn't want for anything, that we shouldn't want a better life. That a better life is the path to poisoning the planet and destroying ourselves.
Yeah,
that's the big lie that they've taught everybody, and they certainly taught it to a lot of the European countries who see this, see privation as some kind of moral stance. And no, it's not. And they've justified it obviously with climate change, and poison and CO2 being the ultimate poison. When frankly, it's so unbelievably anti, science or anti, anti anything. It's funny because I'm
going to say something. I say to some of my friends, I say, look, you get CO2, the planet warms, right? So then you have CO2 and warmth, and then warm air holds more moisture. So you got CO2 plus warmth plus water vapor, and then in daylight, well, what does that give you? That's
More
photosynthesis.
clouds.
It's photosynthesis.
Right. And photosynthesis and cloud cover, which is a natural
Yeah,
ebb and flow. Like, and moreover,
they don't
one of
get
the
it.
things that's, I know, and Rich, and you know, I'm a chemist. Now, I'm
Yeah.
not a geologist. I'm not a climate scientist. So fuck you people with your, with your calling out people who are actually somewhat experts in the field when you're a fucking moron. By the way, when I have people who are who work as social workers telling me I don't know anything about climate science because I'm not a climate scientist, I'm only a chemist. Fuck you. Like,
we could have a whole,
I
we
know
could
a
have a
little bit
whole
more about water
conversation.
chemistry than you. I know a little bit more about water chemistry than you do, just a little bit. What
But
it is
even then, Tom, we could have a whole conversation about
right.
the myth
I just
and the
wanted
theory of the
just a
expert.
simple one. Here's what I heard recently was, and I don't know how accurate this is or anything, but in geologic time, a couple 100 million years isn't a long time, right? In the history of the planet, if you're a literal interpreter of the Bible, you can tune out to this part of the discussion that the Earth is only 10,000 years old or whatever the hell it is. That's fine, but it's not. In reality, it's closer to 4 or 5 billion years old. In systems like in big systems that are like the Earth, okay, you're going to go through cycles, right, of extremes, weather extremes, this extremes, and as these systems mature and as they age, the variations in those cycles will get lower and lower and lower until they kind of reach, because really what you're dealing with here is these systems. I'm talking about like the formation of coral reefs and the ability of the planet to deal with excess carbon dioxide and excess oxygen, right? That system is becoming more and more stable with each grand geologic cycle. That's clear in the geologic record. I remember watching something recently about this, and they weren't saying that we've reached a steady state or anything, but the idea that we can even that the Earth is incapable of dealing with a couple hundred extra, I don't know, 1,000 tons or whatever of CO2 coming into the atmosphere every year at this point is ludicrous. That it can't deal with 1 or 2 degrees of variation in temperature, not kicking off a new ice age or, kicking off runaway warming or anything like that, is ludicrous, because the Earth is getting better at dealing with these systems, dealing with these variations, because the system itself is trending towards a kind of equilibrium. Now we get into the solar cycles and our position versus the galactic ecliptic and all of these other things that have a huge effect on the magnetic field strength, the pole shifts, and all that stuff. That's a different discussion altogether, and frankly is probably the disaster we should be preparing for as opposed to the one that we are preparing for. But that's a different. I mean, if I had to put them up there as things to be worried about, I would be far more worried about the pole shift or another Carrington event than would be about global warming.
Yeah.
Okay. And even though maybe global warming is an issue, right? Maybe I may be wrong. I'm certainly happy to be wrong, but reality is that even the prevention principle, which a lot of quote unquote leftists like to believe in, we will prevent this thing by getting ahead of it. Like, the prevention principle doesn't work because you're assuming that you have perfect knowledge of the system, which you clearly don't. You don't have perfect knowledge of the system, and you can't turn around and enslave everybody on the planet for your hunch. Sorry, you don't get to do that. Okay, as much as you can do that for your own behavior, and you're allowed to attenuate your own behavior, make your own choices the way you want to make them. But fuck a whole lot of you if you think that your hunch is going to be my fucking burden.
Yeah. Well, I want to bring it back to the political, financial, macro aspects of Europe, right? Sure. As using climate change as a civilizing mission. It's a form of European imperialism imposing its values on the rest of the world. Africa that doesn't get to industrialize, doesn't get to use hydrocarbons or anything to build itself. They're going to stay dirt poor in order for the Europeans to stay on top of the pile.
Yes, and that's why that's why the uproar over Giorgia Meloni.
Now, due to YouTube censorship, if you want to watch the rest of this video, please go to bit.ly/CryptoRichOdyssey. Full link in the description below.